The ancient corridors of Windsor Castle echoed with an unusual tension on that crisp autumn morning. Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews had seen many cases in her 20-year career, but nothing quite like this. The call had come directly from Buckingham Palace at dawn, requesting her immediate presence for what was being described as a sensitive genealogical investigation involving the royal family. As Sarah walked through the grand hallways, her footsteps muffled by centuries-old Persian carpets, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case would change everything she thought she knew about the British monarchy. The palace staff moved with unusual urgency, their faces bearing expressions of barely contained anxiety. Something significant was unfolding behind the ornate doors and gilded walls. The investigation had begun 3 weeks earlier when a mysterious letter arrived at the palace, postmarked from a small village in Cornwall. The envelope bore no return address, but its contents would send shockwaves through the highest echelons of British society. Inside was a faded photograph from 1987, showing a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to Princess Catherine, along with a handwritten note claiming knowledge of a long-buried secret about the royal bloodline. The palace's initial response had been to dismiss the letter as another crankish attempt to gain attention or money from the royal family. Such correspondence was not uncommon, and there were established protocols for handling these situations. However, when the same mysterious sender followed up with additional documentation, including birth certificates and hospital records from 3 decades ago, the matter could no longer be ignored. Queen Camilla had been the first to review the materials, her face growing pale as she examined each document with trembling hands. The papers suggested a connection that, if proven true, would fundamentally alter the line of succession and cast doubt on everything the public believed about the royal family's recent history. The implications were staggering, and the potential for scandal was immense. The young Princess Charlotte had been enjoying what seemed like a normal childhood, blissfully unaware that her very existence was about to become the center of a constitutional crisis. At just 9 years old, she had been spending her days attending lessons at her private school, playing in the palace gardens, and accompanying her parents to carefully orchestrated public appearances. Her infectious smile and natural charm had already made her a favorite among the British public. But behind the scenes, palace advisors were working frantically to verify the claims made in the mysterious correspondence. They had quietly contacted genealogical experts, DNA testing facilities, and historical researchers, all sworn to absolute secrecy. The initial findings were disturbing enough to warrant a formal investigation, which was when Detective Inspector Matthews received her unusual assignment. The Queen Consort had insisted on being personally involved in every aspect of the investigation. Camilla's relationship with the royal family had always been complicated, having married into the monarchy later in life after years of public scrutiny and criticism. She had worked tirelessly to rehabilitate her image and establish her place within the institution, making this new revelation particularly threatening to her carefully constructed position. As the investigation progressed, palace insiders began to notice changes in Camilla's behavior. The usually composed and confident Queen Consort appeared increasingly agitated during public appearances. Her hands would shake slightly during tea ceremonies, and staff members reported hearing hushed phone conversations late into the night. The weight of whatever knowledge she possessed seemed to be taking a visible toll on her mental state. The royal protection officers, known as sentinels within palace circles, had always prided themselves on their unwavering dedication to the crown. These elite security professionals were trained to handle any threat to the royal family, whether physical, political, or reputational. However, the current situation presented challenges unlike anything in their extensive training. How do you protect the monarchy from a threat that might be embedded within its own bloodline? Detective Inspector Matthews began conducting interviews with longtime palace staff, many of whom had served the royal family for decades. Their testimonies painted a picture of an institution grappling with secrets that had been carefully hidden for over 30 years. Some staff members recalled unusual events from the late 1980s, including unexplained visits to private medical facilities and encrypted communications between senior royals. The investigation team discovered that several key documents from that era had mysteriously disappeared from the palace archives. File cabinets that should have contained medical records, correspondence, and official documentation showed clear signs of tampering. Someone had gone to considerable lengths to erase specific information from the official record, raising questions about who knew what and when they knew it. As word of the investigation began to leak beyond the palace walls, despite strict confidentiality agreements, the British tabloids started picking up whispers of a developing story. Royal correspondents who had spent years cultivating sources within the palace hierarchy suddenly found themselves dealing with nervous contacts who spoke in coded language about potential revelations that could shake the monarchy to its core. The pressure on Queen Camilla intensified as the investigation moved into its second week. Palace physicians had begun monitoring her blood pressure and stress levels after she experienced what was diplomatically described as a minor episode during a private meeting with senior advisors. The official explanation given to the press was exhaustion from a demanding schedule, but insiders knew the truth was far more complex. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte continued her normal routine, attended by her usual staff and protection detail. Her tutors had been instructed to maintain absolute normalcy, but even the youngest members of the royal family seemed to sense the underlying tension. Charlotte's questions about why there were so many serious-looking adults having whispered conversations throughout the palace had become increasingly difficult to deflect. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Inspector Matthews uncovered a series of sealed medical records that had been stored in a private facility in Scotland. These documents, dating back to 1987, contained information that would prove to be the missing piece of a puzzle that had confounded the investigation team for weeks. The records detailed medical procedures and genetic testing that had never been publicly disclosed. As Matthews reviewed the Scottish medical files, she realized that the implications extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The documents suggested a level of deception and cover-up that reached the highest levels of the royal family and government. Phone calls were made to Buckingham Palace, and within hours, a helicopter was dispatched to bring the detective and her findings back to London immediately. The palace was in controlled chaos when Matthews arrived that evening. Senior advisors, legal experts, and constitutional scholars had been summoned for emergency meetings. The usual protocols for royal decision-making were abandoned as the gravity of the situation became clear. This was no longer just about family secrets or public relations management. It was about the fundamental legitimacy of the monarchy itself. Queen Camilla was noticeably absent from the emergency meetings, having retreated to her private quarters with her personal physician and closest confidants. Reports from her staff suggested that she had been struggling to process the full implications of what the investigation had uncovered. The woman who had fought so hard to establish her place in royal history now faced the possibility that her efforts might have been built on a foundation of lies. The royal sentinels, those stalwart protectors of the crown, found themselves in an impossible position. Their duty was to protect the royal family from all threats. But what happened when the threat came from within? How could they guard against revelations that might undermine the very institution they had sworn to defend? Some of the most senior protection officers had begun showing signs of stress that their rigorous training had never prepared them to handle. The Scottish medical records revealed a truth so shocking that even Detective Inspector Matthews, with her years of experience handling sensitive cases, found herself questioning everything she thought she understood about the royal family. The documents detailed a secret pregnancy in 1987 involving a young woman who bore the maiden name that would later become associated with Princess Catherine's maternal lineage. Dr. Elizabeth Thornfield, the retired physician whose signature appeared on the medical records, had been contacted by the investigation team after her name surfaced in the Scottish files. At 83 years old, she lived quietly in a cottage overlooking the Highlands, far from the political machinations of London. When Matthews arrived at her door on a gray Thursday morning, the elderly doctor's hands trembled as she invited the detective inside for tea. The conversation that followed would prove to be the most crucial interview of the entire investigation. Dr. Thornfield had carried the weight of professional secrecy for over 30 years, but the recent developments had convinced her that the time for silence had passed. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood the magnitude of what she was revealing. According to Dr. Thornfield's testimony, a young woman had arrived at her private clinic in the autumn of 1987, accompanied by two individuals who identified themselves as representatives of the royal household. The woman, barely 18 years old, was in the early stages of pregnancy and appeared to be in considerable distress. The circumstances surrounding her arrival were unusual, even by the standards of a physician who regularly treated high-profile clients seeking discretion. The pregnancy had been monitored closely for several months, with regular checkups conducted under conditions of extraordinary secrecy. Dr. Thornfield recalled that all records were kept in a separate filing system, and she had been instructed to report directly to a contact within the palace rather than following normal medical protocols. The level of security surrounding the case had been unlike anything in her decades of practice. When the baby was born in early 1988, Dr. Thornfield witnessed something that had haunted her for years. The infant, a healthy girl, was immediately taken from her mother by the palace representatives. The young woman, whom Dr. Thornfield later learned had connections to Queen Camilla's social circle, was reportedly given a substantial financial settlement and relocated to another country. The baby's fate remained unknown to the doctor until now. As Detective Inspector Matthews listened to this account, the pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture that defied belief. The timeline aligned perfectly with Princess Charlotte's age, and the physical descriptions provided by Dr. Thornfield matched characteristics that would later appear in the young princess. But the implications went far beyond simple genealogy. They suggested a deliberate deception that had been maintained for nearly a decade. The investigation team had meanwhile been working to verify the DNA evidence that had accompanied the original mysterious letter. The laboratory results, when they finally arrived, confirmed what many had begun to suspect, but none had dared to voice openly. The genetic markers indicated a direct familial relationship between Princess Charlotte and the woman described in Dr. Thornfield's medical records, but more significantly, they showed no genetic connection to the individuals publicly recognized as her parents. Queen Camilla's deteriorating condition became increasingly apparent as the investigation progressed. Palace staff reported that she had been spending hours alone in the palace chapel, apparently seeking solace in prayer and reflection. Her public appearances were quietly canceled, officially attributed to a minor illness. But insiders knew that she was struggling to cope with the weight of revelations that threatened to destroy everything she had worked to build. The royal sentinels assigned to protect Princess Charlotte found themselves in an unprecedented ethical dilemma. Their duty was to safeguard the young princess, but the investigation had revealed that her very presence in the royal family might be based on deception. How could they continue to protect someone whose existence challenged the legitimate succession of the crown? Several of the most senior officers had requested private meetings with their supervisors, seeking guidance on how to navigate this impossible situation. Meanwhile, the young princess herself remained blissfully unaware of the chaos swirling around her. Charlotte continued to attend her lessons, play with her toys, and participate in the carefully managed royal activities that had defined her life since birth. Her tutors and nannies maintained their professional composure, but privately struggled with the knowledge that the child they cared for might not be who everyone believed her to be. The mystery deepened when the investigation team discovered that the original letter and photographs had been sent by someone with intimate knowledge of palace operations. The paper used for the correspondence was of a quality typically reserved for official royal stationery, and the handwriting analysis revealed characteristics suggesting the author had received formal training in calligraphy and protocol. This was not the work of an outside opportunist, but someone within the royal establishment itself. Detective Inspector Matthews began to suspect that the person behind the revelations might be someone who had been present during the events of 1987-1988. The level of detail provided in the anonymous communications suggested first-hand knowledge of the secret pregnancy and subsequent cover-up. But identifying this individual proved challenging, as many of the potential witnesses from that era were either deceased, living abroad, or bound by non-disclosure agreements that carried severe legal consequences. The investigation took another dramatic turn when palace archives revealed a series of encrypted communications from the late 1980s between Queen Camilla, then still Mrs. Parker Bowles, and several high-ranking government officials. The messages, which required specialized decryption software to decode, discussed arrangements for what was euphemistically referred to as the Scottish matter and the young woman's situation. These communications painted a picture of careful planning and coordination between multiple parties to conceal the pregnancy and arrange for the secret adoption of the resulting child. The operation had involved not just the royal household, but also government officials, medical professionals, and private security contractors. The scope of the conspiracy was far broader than anyone had initially imagined. As news of the investigation continued to leak despite official denials, the British tabloid press began investigating their own sources within palace circles. Royal correspondents who had spent years building relationships with staff members suddenly found themselves piecing together fragments of information that suggested a story of unprecedented magnitude. The palace press office worked frantically to contain the narrative, but the rumors were spreading faster than they could be suppressed. The psychological pressure on Queen Camilla reached a breaking point during a private meeting with senior constitutional advisors. According to witnesses present at the meeting, she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as she spoke about the impossible position she found herself in. The woman who had endured years of public criticism and scrutiny while fighting to establish her legitimacy within the royal family now faced the possibility that her efforts might be undone by secrets from her past. Her emotional collapse was witnessed by several palace staff members, including some of the royal sentinels who had sworn to protect the crown. For these dedicated professionals, seeing the queen consort in such distress represented a fundamental challenge to their understanding of their role. They had been trained to be pillars of strength in service to an institution they believed was built on unshakable foundations, but now those foundations appeared to be crumbling before their eyes. The investigation team made another crucial discovery when they uncovered financial records from 1988 showing large, unexplained payments made from royal accounts to various individuals and organizations. The payments had been carefully disguised as routine expenditures for palace maintenance and security, but forensic accounting revealed their true nature as hush money paid to ensure the silence of everyone involved in the Scottish operation. Dr. Thornfield's testimony became even more significant when she revealed that she had kept detailed personal notes about the case, hidden in her private safe for over 30 years. These notes, written in her own medical shorthand, contained observations about the young woman's emotional state, the behavior of the palace representatives, and her own concerns about the ethical implications of what she was being asked to facilitate. The notes provided corroborating evidence for much of what the investigation had already uncovered. The young woman who had given birth in 1987, according to Dr. Thornfield's recollections, had been promised that her child would be given a good life and the best possible opportunities. She had been told that the adoption was being arranged by a wealthy family who could provide everything a young girl could need. The deception went far deeper than simply concealing a pregnancy. It involved convincing a vulnerable young mother that she was making a noble sacrifice for her child's benefit. As the investigation entered its third week, the strain on everyone involved became increasingly apparent. Palace staff moved through their daily routines with the mechanical precision of people trying to maintain normalcy in extraordinary circumstances. The royal sentinels, typically models of composure and discipline, showed signs of the psychological stress that came from protecting an institution whose very legitimacy was under question. The breakthrough that would ultimately unravel the entire conspiracy came from an unexpected source. Margaret Henley, a retired palace seamstress who had worked for the royal household for 47 years, contacted Detective Inspector Matthews after hearing rumors about the ongoing investigation. At 72 years old, Margaret had witnessed decades of royal secrets, but the current situation had compelled her to break her long-held silence. Margaret's testimony revealed details that no one outside the immediate conspiracy could have known. She remembered being asked to prepare special infant clothing in early 1988, items that were distinctly different from the usual royal baby garments. The clothing had been made to very specific measurements and delivered to a location outside the palace, rather than being added to the official royal nursery inventory. More significantly, Margaret recalled overhearing a heated argument between Queen Camilla and an unidentified woman in the palace seamstress quarters during that same period. The conversation, which Margaret had witnessed while working late one evening, involved discussions about responsibility, maternal rights, and promises that had been made and broken. The emotional intensity of the exchange had stayed with Margaret for decades, though she had never understood its full significance until now. The investigation team used Margaret's testimony to narrow their search for the anonymous letter writer. Cross-referencing her description of the unidentified woman with palace staff records from 1987-1988 led them to Helena Morrison, a former lady-in-waiting who had served Queen Camilla briefly during that period. Helena had left her position abruptly in early 1988, officially citing personal reasons, and had subsequently moved to Australia, where she had remained for over 30 years. When Detective Inspector Matthews contacted Helena in Melbourne, the response was immediate and emotional. Helena had been waiting for this call for decades, she explained, carrying the weight of knowledge that had shaped every day of her adult life. She agreed to return to London immediately to provide testimony, bringing with her documents and photographs that she had preserved as insurance against the day when the truth would inevitably surface. Helena's story transformed the investigation from a genealogical mystery into a tale of deception, manipulation, and profound betrayal. As Queen Camilla's lady-in-waiting, Helena had been privy to the most intimate aspects of the conspiracy. She revealed that the young woman who had given birth to Princess Charlotte was not a stranger seeking help, but rather someone with a direct connection to the royal inner circle. According to Helena's testimony, the young woman was actually Queen Camilla's niece, the daughter of Camilla's younger brother, who had died in a motorcycle accident in 1986. The girl, orphaned and vulnerable, had been living under Camilla's guardianship when she became pregnant at 17. The father of the child was reportedly a young man from a prominent political family, someone whose involvement in the scandal could have caused significant embarrassment for both families. Rather than supporting her niece through a difficult situation, Camilla had orchestrated an elaborate deception designed to protect her own social standing and future prospects with the royal family. The pregnancy was hidden. The birth was conducted in secret, and the baby was eventually integrated into the royal family through a process that Helena described as systematic identity manipulation spanning several years. The most shocking revelation came when Helena explained how Princess Charlotte had actually entered the royal family. Rather than being born to her publicly recognized parents, Charlotte had been introduced as an adopted child whose background had been carefully fabricated. The adoption had been arranged through private channels, with official documents created to establish a false genealogy that would withstand casual scrutiny but not detailed forensic analysis. Queen Camilla had used her influence and connections to ensure that the adoption appeared legitimate and that Charlotte's true origins remained hidden. The process had involved collaboration with government officials, medical professionals, and legal experts who had been either paid for their cooperation or convinced that they were participating in a necessary deception to protect state interests. Helena's decision to finally reveal the truth had been triggered by recent events within the royal family that made her fear for Princess Charlotte's future. She had watched from Australia as the young princess grew up in the public eye, never knowing her true heritage or the circumstances of her birth. The weight of that deception had become unbearable, particularly as Charlotte reached an age where questions about her identity and place in the succession might become more pressing. The documents that Helena brought back from Australia included photographs of the original birth certificate, showing Princess Charlotte's real name and parentage, as well as correspondence between various conspirators discussing the logistics of the deception. She had also preserved personal items that had belonged to Charlotte's birth mother, including a locket containing photographs and a handwritten letter expressing her hopes and fears for her daughter's future. Detective Inspector Matthews realized that the investigation had uncovered not just a case of identity fraud, but a complex web of institutional corruption that implicated numerous high-ranking individuals in both the royal household and the government. The scope of the conspiracy required levels of coordination and resources that could only have been mobilized with support from the highest levels of power. The psychological impact on Queen Camilla intensified as Helena's testimony became known within palace circles. The woman who had spent years carefully crafting her public image as a devoted stepmother and grandmother now faced exposure as someone who had manipulated vulnerable family members for personal gain. Her emotional stability, already compromised by the ongoing investigation, deteriorated further as the full implications became clear. The royal sentinels found themselves in an increasingly impossible position as details of the conspiracy emerged. Their duty to protect the crown now included safeguarding an institution that had apparently been built on systematic deception. Several senior officers had begun questioning whether their oath of loyalty extended to protecting falsehoods that undermined the very legitimacy of the monarchy they served. Princess Charlotte's daily routine continued unchanged, but her caregivers struggled with the knowledge of what was being revealed about her background. The young princess had begun asking more questions about her family history for a school project, innocent inquiries that took on profound significance given what the investigation had uncovered. Her tutors found themselves deflecting her questions while wondering how long the deception could be maintained. The investigation team discovered that the conspiracy had required ongoing maintenance over the years, with regular payments made to ensure continued silence from various participants. Financial records revealed a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts used to disguise these transactions, indicating that the cover-up had continued to actively evolve rather than simply relying on initial agreements. Dr. Thornfield provided additional testimony that filled in crucial gaps in the timeline. She revealed that the young woman who had given birth to Princess Charlotte had been told her child had died during delivery, a lie designed to prevent her from ever seeking contact or attempting to reclaim custody. The emotional cruelty of this deception added another layer of horror to an already shocking story. The pressure on the investigation team intensified as they realized the constitutional crisis that would result from public revelation of their findings. The legitimacy of Princess Charlotte's position in the line of succession would be questioned, potentially triggering a fundamental re-evaluation of royal protocols and procedures. Legal experts warned that the implications could extend far beyond the current royal family, potentially affecting historical decisions and treaties that had been made based on assumed bloodlines. Meanwhile, the mysterious leaks to the press continued, suggesting that someone with access to the investigation was deliberately feeding information to journalists. The palace press office worked frantically to contain the growing speculation, but their denials were becoming increasingly difficult to sustain as more specific details emerged in tabloid reporting. Queen Camilla's isolation within the palace became more pronounced as even her closest advisors began to distance themselves from the expanding scandal. The woman who had once commanded respect and deference found herself increasingly alone, her emotional state deteriorating as the weight of decades of deception finally caught up with her. Staff reported hearing her sobbing behind closed doors during what should have been routine meetings and appointments. The investigation reached a critical juncture when Helena Morrison revealed the existence of a video recording that she had secretly made in 1988. The recording, stored in a safety deposit box in Melbourne for over 30 years, captured a conversation between Queen Camilla and several co-conspirators discussing the final stages of the deception. The audio quality was poor, but voice analysis confirmed the identities of the speakers and provided irrefutable evidence of their involvement in the conspiracy. The video recording that Helena Morrison had preserved for over 3 decades would prove to be the final piece of evidence needed to confirm the full scope of the conspiracy. When Detective Inspector Matthews reviewed the grainy footage in the secure viewing room at Buckingham Palace, she witnessed Queen Camilla discussing the logistics of permanently separating Princess Charlotte from her birth identity with a coldness that shocked even the seasoned investigator. The recording captured Camilla instructing her co-conspirators on how to maintain the deception over time, including provisions for handling potential investigations and managing any attempts by the birth mother to locate her child. The level of premeditation and calculation displayed in the conversation revealed a side of the queen consort that contradicted her carefully cultivated public image as a caring and maternal figure. As the investigation team prepared their final report, the psychological toll on everyone involved became increasingly apparent. Several palace staff members had requested transfers or early retirement rather than continue working in an environment where fundamental questions about the royal family's legitimacy remained unanswered. The atmosphere within Buckingham Palace had transformed from one of dignified tradition to nervous uncertainty. The most heartbreaking aspect of the entire affair was the gradual realization of what Princess Charlotte's life had truly been built upon. The young girl who had charmed the British public with her genuine smile and natural grace was actually a victim of an elaborate deception that had stolen her connection to her true heritage. Her real mother, according to the investigation's findings, had spent years believing her daughter was dead while watching the royal family from afar. Queen Camilla's final breakdown occurred during a confrontation with the investigation team when she was presented with the complete evidence of her involvement in the conspiracy. The emotional collapse was witnessed by several senior palace officials, including the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Prime Minister's private secretary, who had been summoned to discuss the constitutional implications of the revelations. The scene that unfolded was unlike anything in modern royal history. The queen consort, faced with irrefutable evidence of her deception, broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as she finally admitted to orchestrating the entire conspiracy. Her confession, delivered through tears and barely coherent words, confirmed every detail that the investigation had uncovered over the previous month. Camilla revealed that her motivation had been a desperate attempt to secure her own position within the royal family by demonstrating her ability to handle delicate situations and provide solutions to problems that could threaten the monarchy. The teenage pregnancy of her niece had presented both a crisis and an opportunity which she had exploited with ruthless efficiency to further her own ambitions. The royal sentinels who witnessed this emotional collapse found themselves confronting the destruction of everything they had believed about the institution they served. These elite protection officers, trained to maintain composure under any circumstances, struggled to process the implications of what they had seen. Several of them requested immediate reassignment, unable to continue protecting a crown that had been revealed to be built on systematic deception. Detective Inspector Matthews completed her investigation with a sense of profound sadness rather than professional satisfaction. The case had revealed not just individual wrongdoing, but institutional failures that raised fundamental questions about accountability and transparency within the monarchy. Her final report, classified at the highest level of government secrecy, documented a conspiracy that implicated dozens of individuals across multiple institutions. The immediate aftermath of the investigation's completion saw unprecedented activity within government and palace circles. Constitutional experts worked around the clock to assess the legal implications of Princess Charlotte's true status, while crisis management specialists developed strategies for handling the potential public relations disaster that revelation of the truth could create. Princess Charlotte's future became the subject of intense debate among senior officials. Some argued that she should be removed from the line of succession immediately, while others contended that her innocent involvement in the deception meant she should be protected from the consequences of actions taken before her birth. The young princess remained unaware of these discussions, continuing her education and royal duties under the careful supervision of specially briefed staff. The search for Princess Charlotte's birth mother became a priority as officials grappled with questions about her legal rights and potential claims to custody or contact with her daughter. The investigation team discovered that she was living quietly in Canada, having rebuilt her life under the assumption that her child had died decades ago. The prospect of reuniting them presented both emotional and legal challenges that no one was prepared to handle. Queen Camilla's mental health deteriorated significantly following her confession, requiring medical intervention and round-the-clock supervision. The woman who had once been a pillar of strength within the royal family was now confined to her private quarters, unable to perform any of her official duties. Her physician recommended immediate treatment at a private psychiatric facility, but palace officials worried about the security implications of such an arrangement. The investigation's findings triggered a comprehensive review of royal security protocols and background verification procedures. It became clear that the conspiracy could not have succeeded without significant failures in the systems designed to protect the monarchy from exactly this type of deception. Senior security officials faced uncomfortable questions about how such an elaborate fraud had gone undetected for so long. The emotional impact on palace staff extended far beyond those directly involved in the investigation. Many longtime employees found themselves questioning their loyalty to an institution that had apparently betrayed its own principles so fundamentally. Some began seeking employment elsewhere, while others struggled with depression and anxiety as they tried to reconcile their dedication to royal service with the reality of what had been revealed. The British government faced its own crisis as the investigation's findings became known within senior circles. The involvement of government officials in the original conspiracy raised questions about the separation between royal and state interests that went to the heart of the United Kingdom's constitutional arrangements. Several civil servants faced potential criminal charges for their participation in the deception. International implications began to emerge as foreign governments learned of the investigation through diplomatic channels. Questions were raised about treaties and agreements that had been negotiated based on assumptions about the royal family's legitimacy that were now in doubt. The scandal threatened to damage Britain's reputation and relationships with key allies at a time when international cooperation was crucial for addressing global challenges. The investigation team's final act was to compile a comprehensive archive of all evidence gathered during their month-long inquiry. The materials were sealed under orders that would keep them classified for 50 years, ensuring that the full truth of Princess Charlotte's origins would remain hidden from public view for decades to come. This decision, made at the highest levels of government, reflected the determination to protect the monarchy from a scandal that could prove fatal to the institution. Detective Inspector Matthews submitted her resignation from the Metropolitan Police immediately following the completion of the investigation. The weight of what she had discovered, combined with the knowledge that justice could never truly be served due to political considerations, made it impossible for her to continue her law enforcement career. She relocated to Scotland, choosing a quiet life far from the corridors of power where such devastating secrets were routinely buried. The royal sentinels who had witnessed Queen Camilla's emotional breakdown struggled with the aftermath of that traumatic scene. Several sought counseling through confidential channels, while others transferred to different security assignments where they could maintain some distance from the royal family. The psychological support services typically available to elite protection officers were inadequate for dealing with the unique trauma of watching an institution they revered crumble before their eyes. In the end, the investigation into Princess Charlotte's ancestry revealed a truth too dangerous to acknowledge publicly, but too significant to ignore privately. The young princess continued her royal duties, unaware that her entire identity had been fabricated through an elaborate conspiracy orchestrated by the woman she knew as her grandmother. The cost of maintaining this deception would continue to ripple through the lives of everyone who had learned the truth, creating a burden of knowledge that would shape the monarchy's future in ways that the public would never understand.